Imagine being stuck on a train where people start disappearing, one by one. What happens next will chill you, so stay to the very end of the movie if you dare. Today's movie is Blood Train. This Indonesian horror movie, Blood Train, is packed with thrills that might just keep you on the edge of your seat. So don't watch it during the day. The story begins with a train company launching a special promotion to attract tourists. The prize? A free visit to the infamous Forest Park. Nestled deep in the heart of a forest few have ever returned from. Tickets sold out quickly, but not for reasons you'd expect. On the day of departure, women gathered outside the station, clutching faded photos and screaming out warnings. Their husbands had been involved in the construction of this cursed train, but had mysteriously disappeared afterward, their fates as twisted as the iron tracks the train now rode on. The train company and police tried investigating, but every clue led to dead ends. Or worse, dead bodies. It was said the train passed through territories infested with killers, maniacs, and unspeakable horrors, leaving the authorities too terrified to investigate further. The developers covered up the gruesome disappearances, ensuring the horror didn't derail the project. Protesters, they were forcefully driven away, while the eager tourists, completely oblivious, boarded the Blood Train with foolish excitement. They had no idea they were stepping into a one-way ride to hell. After the chaos outside the station, the train finally lurched forward, creeping slowly into the wilderness. The lush green scenery hypnotized the passengers, who snapped pictures with glee, unaware that they were being watched by unseen eyes from the dark forest. Among them was one woman, her eyes glued not to the window but to an old photo. It was her husband, one of the workers who vanished. She wasn't here for the scenery or the park. She was here to find the truth. But the truth found her first. In the back of the train, she thought she saw him, a glimpse of his figure, standing still, watching. She rushed towards him, her heart pounding. But when she reached the spot where he stood, he was gone. Panic set in, her mind racing with confusion. She looked back down the carriage, and there he was again, staring with empty eyes. Eyes that once loved her but were now hollow. She frantically asked the attendant if they'd seen a man matching his description, but they insisted no such person had boarded the train. Her heart sank as she noticed the company's developer sitting smugly in the front carriage. She tried to confront him, but the attendant blocked her path. Meanwhile, two young girls were admiring the scenery when something sinister interrupted their moment of peace. Bro, with eyes black as midnight, swooped down, following the train closely, too closely. Xiaomei, one of the girls, felt her stomach churn with dread and excused herself to the bathroom. She walked through the bustling car 5, but when she entered car 4, everything felt wrong. The air was heavy, suffocating. She splashed water on her face, and when she looked up, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the moment the train entered a tunnel, the lights flickered, and shadowy figures began shifting outside the windows. And they were watching. At the same time, the conductor noticed something bizarre. Doors were opening and closing by themselves, as if some invisible hand was tampering with the lock. Assuming it was a malfunction, he radioed for repairs. Xiaoya, Xiaomei's friend, grew worried when she hadn't returned. But when she reached the bathroom, the power abruptly cut out. The darkness was absolute. She knocked on the door, calling for Xiaomei, but instead of her friend, a stranger's voice whispered back. Not a friendly whisper. Meanwhile, in car 5, a little girl was playing with another girl, or what she thought was another girl. Their laughter echoed through the car until suddenly, connection between car 5 and the train snapped. The little girl vanished into the tunnel with the broken carriage, swallowed by the dark. Xiaomei and Xiaoya, horrified, rushed to find help. But when they looked back, car 5 was gone, as if it had never existed. The attendant tried to calm the passengers, saying it was a repair mishap, but his face betrayed him. Something far worse was happening, and everyone could feel it. The air had changed. It was thick with dread, heavy with the scent of decay. The attendant opened an electrical box and recoiled in horror. Water plants and rotting flesh oozed out from within, something that shouldn't be there. Something that defied reason. His heart pounded as he shut it quickly, pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine. As the blood train entered the number 4 tunnel, the air grew colder. Eerie, echoing laughter drifted through the carriages, and passengers began to choke, as if invisible hands were squeezing their throats. Some started speaking in twisted tongues, their eyes rolling back in their heads. A photographer, snapping pictures in car 3, looked through his camera lens and screamed. What he saw wasn't human, it was something else. Something that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. Xiaomei and Xiaoya, desperate to escape, moved toward car 2. But as they reached the door, the attendant whispered something that chilled them to the core. We've already reported this to the higher-ups. There's no going back now. As the train entered the final tunnel, the lights went out. Everything was silent, until it wasn't. Figure appeared, shrouded in darkness, face twisted with rage and branches growing from her body. It was Mirror Granny, and she was ready to exact her revenge. A single scream rang out before a passenger fell lifeless to the ground. Meanwhile, people in car 2 witnessed the scene and finally understood why the previous 3 cars had detached. The attendant wanted to tell the conductor to stop the train, but the developer came over and accused Xiaomei and the attendant of causing trouble to rob the women in the front carriages. Hearing this, the women in the carriage immediately became agitated, grabbing wine bottles and pointing them at them. Just as the atmosphere grew tense, the woman looking for her husband suddenly screamed because she saw a tunnel appearing ahead. The developer instinctively ran to car 1 and locked the door to prevent others from following. In car 2, the people were still oblivious to the danger and were caught in a chaotic fight. The train entered the tunnel, the lights went out, and a woman covered in branches appeared. She let out a loud scream, and a passenger immediately died. Seeing this, Xiaomei and the others tried to escape to car 1, but the door was locked. Fortunately, the conductor opened the door just in time to save a few people, but everyone left in car 2 was killed by the monsters. The train, once 5 carriages long, was now reduced to just 1 carriage and a locomotive. The conductor found the driver and told him to stop the train immediately. But the developer wouldn't allow it and crazily tried to stop everyone. However, he was outnumbered, and the train was eventually stopped. The developer was subdued, and everyone questioned him about what he knew. Realizing he couldn't hide it anymore, the developer revealed the truth. It turned out that before, to make the scenery along the route more beautiful, the developer planned to cut down the trees next to the railway, despite the opposition from the local residents. The locals warned that deep in the forest lived a terrifying entity called Mirror Granny, who guarded the forest. If the trees were cut down, it would anger her, and they would face retribution. But the developer, driven by profit, ignored their warnings and cut down the trees. Not long after, the construction workers began to disappear daily, until one person accidentally vanished completely. To avoid affecting the train's launch, the developer used his connections to cover it up, claiming they didn't know how the workers disappeared. Even the police were helpless, because this wasn't something ordinary people could handle. What the developer didn't expect was that as soon as the railway opened, Mirror Granny came for them. Now, everyone understood the truth. They realized that staying put wasn't an option. Their communication devices mysteriously stopped working, so they decided to leave the train and find another way to the final destination, Forest Park. They thought the trouble would only happen in the tunnels, but they didn't expect that. Mirror Granny had been waiting in the tunnels for a long time. When she didn't find them, she came out to search for them. The survivors were then dragged into the darkness by an invisible force. The remaining people scattered and tried to escape, but this was Mirror Granny's territory. Where could they possibly run? One by one, they were dragged away by Mirror Granny's branches. The worst fate awaited the developer. He met his final judgment when Mirror Granny grabbed his head with both hands and drained him in an instant. Meanwhile, Xiaomei, hearing the screams around her, could only hide behind a rock, trembling in fear. But when she turned her head, she saw something that made her faint. When Xiaomei woke up, she found herself wrapped in branches, with more vines creeping towards her. When she looked up, she saw her friend Xiaoya had already met a tragic end. At the same time, the tunnels on the railway began to collapse one by one, and the passengers turned into trees. Mirror Granny's method was clear. Since you cut down my trees, you'll pay with your lives. It seemed like Mirror Granny was going to kill everyone, but to Xiaomei's surprise, the branches around her slowly receded, and Mirror Granny left her with a mark before disappearing. In the end, Xiaomei was the only survivor of the train. Why did Mirror Granny spare her? Perhaps it was because Xiaomei had cancer and was already facing death. Mirror Granny might have thought it wasn't worth the effort, and with that, the movie ends. Subscribe to our channel for upcoming horror. Until then, check out this horror of Exuma by clicking here.